So we are on the grand finale, and we have Kirat Assi, whose story, featured in Sweet Bobby, Tortoise podcast, and later Netflix documentary, it reveals a harrowing experience of being manipulated by someone pretending to be a family connection. What started as a friendship grew into a 5-year-long relationship, only for to later discover everything was a lie. The documentary explores the rise of catfishing, highlighting how the internet can be weaponized and how women are often seen as vulnerable targets. Kirat's journey underscores the need for online regulation, particularly with AI, to protect digital safety. It sheds a light on the severity of impact on victims and challenging victim shaming, emphasizing the importance of empowerment, resilience, and awareness. By sharing her story, Kirat provides a safe space for victims to speak, stay strong, and better understand the complexities of online deception. This session aims to help others recognize the dangers and protect themselves. After all, it could happen to anyone. Joining Kirat for this fireside chat, we have our very own International Women's Day Conference Expo Engagement Manager, what's a mouthful, Natisha Patel. Please welcome her onto the stage.
What happened to me is just one crazy story. You can't make it up. We're talking about 10 years of my life. I was 32, very focused on my career. All my friends are getting married, and I just felt, when's it going to be my turn? One day, I get a friend request from Bobby that changes my life. Bobby comes from a well-respected family. We had mutual connections. Over the next few months, 7 or 8 months, 18 months, 4 years, we've sent thousands of messages. Eventually, he tells me he loves me. We try to make it as normal as you can online. Bobby's friends and family told me he wants to be with me. But there's always an excuse why he can't see me face to face. The stroke, his mental health. Bobby's been shot several times. What is going on? He started to lean on me.
Texting her constantly.
What I wouldn't give to hold you.
She was not taking care of herself.
It was a total takeover of her life.
If I wasn't on the other end of the phone line, it upset him. We'd just fall asleep with the line open. Finally, I was questioning everything.
I've never spoken to her in my life.
I want answers. What I find so elaborate, so huge.
It's just unbelievable.
Profiles disappear. I'm terrified. You don't know what they're capable of.
This is sickening.
What was a lie? What was the truth? Who was the real Bobby? All of this time, who have I been sleeping on the phone with?
Wow. I haven't seen that for months. Kirat, welcome to Birmingham.
Thank you.
You mentioned earlier that you actually studied here in Birmingham, didn't you?
I did. I went to Aston, just down the road.
Yeah. And how does it feel to be back with us?
Birmingham's like a second home almost, so it's always lovely to be back.
And are you enjoying our event today, our Expo and conference?
It's been lovely. So I got here this afternoon and I've met so many of you downstairs, and thank you. I know it's late in the day and it's the last, it's the keynote, but thank you, because so many of you could be gone somewhere else and be doing something else. So I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's been a great day. We've had a great turnout, great discussions, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a privilege and an honour to be on this stage with Kirat, who has been through so much, and we will delve into that as well. But before I get into the questions, Kirat, I just want to ask you, how are you?
I'm okay. I am myself. I think we've got to remember this all came to light in 2018. Lots has happened since then. The documentary's only just come out in October and is only 82 minutes of nearly 9 years, and it's quite limited. So, yeah, it's a journey. The police case is still open. Lots of things still going on, but it's a journey. But it's how we travel that journey that's important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You've been through so much. And for anyone in the room that doesn't know about your story, about the podcast, the Netflix, do you want to give a quick little brief introduction?
Okay, so the trailer that you watched is quite what's sensational, shall we say?
Yeah.
Well, that's Netflix for you. But it was, let's say, a 9-year catfish, a 5-year somebody who I thought was a family connection, who we know quite well in terms of like middle family. And they were just talking to us, and they seemed to know everything about everything, so it was all verifiable. But it was more that the first person that approached me was my cousin's so-called boyfriend, who she'd broken up with. And before I even spoke to him still, because I'm quite cautious online, I'd checked in. So things had developed from there. I was introduced to other family, one of them being Bobby. And 5.5 years later, with lots of drama around him, he'd been married, divorced, married again. I'm in my second relationship during that 5.5-year period. While he was extremely unwell, he declares his love for me. I say no. And then 6 months later, on his, like, what I thought was his deathbed while he was in palliative care, I said, agreed to be in a relationship with him for the remaining 6 months of his life that I'd been told. But then he didn't die, which always sounds horrible to say, but he didn't die. But he didn't die. I wish he had. Sounds so bad. But that left me stuck in a relationship that I never thought was going to happen. And because of all the family ties and the politics that were known within the family, that went on for a few years. And when I started, very quickly, 6 months in, started challenging it, it became slowly, first of all, it became difficult, mentally challenging. And then it became very quickly abusive when I started asking too many questions. And that went on for, I think, 2.5 years, the worst of it, until I hired a PI to help me work out what was going on.
Wow. I mean, I listened to the podcast in 2021 and I was just captivated from the start. The case, the story is so complex, so many layers, and you're just left speechless when you hear what happened, what you went through, how someone could think of doing these things, the extent of creating, was it 60 fake Facebook profiles?
Yeah, at the time we knew it was 60, we now know there's more.
Wow. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I struggled with my own Facebook and my Instagram. How someone can manage 60 profiles, I don't know. But I think that act in itself of creating those profiles speaks volumes about that person and the perpetrator.
Well, we talk about profiles. I'm talking about people. Yeah. So each of those people would have, well, some of them had email addresses, phone numbers. They had an Instagram. They had a Facebook. Some of them were on Twitter as well. So there was multiple profiles for that many people, for some of them. So it isn't just a Facebook profile. It's more than that.
I mean, it sounds like a full-time job, managing that. I don't know how this person did that, but we'll leave that there, each to their own. So to start off with, what made you want to share your story through, firstly, the podcast series, which what I thought was phenomenal, and then the Netflix documentary? And then how did you cope with the public attention around both of those?
I actually never chose to share any of it. What I did choose to do was stand up to her, make her accountable for what she did, by trying to go to the police, who didn't listen. And then when the police didn't do anything, I had to find a lawyer that would help. And that was difficult because it was such a crazy story. Trying to explain it to anybody, even people that I knew, was difficult. And it was deliberately engineered to make me look stupid. And I think victims of DV or any kind of coercive control understand what that feels like. But eventually I found the internet lawyer who took it on only because I had another male lawyer who was my client, actually, who was a restaurateur. I didn't know he was a lawyer as well. He didn't know he was a solicitor, but it was too big for him to handle. I then found this other solicitor, and he took me on just because I found out afterwards at the end of everything that the only reason he took me on was because I had the other person vouching for me, a man vouching for me, even though I was extremely rational and I had every bit of evidence laid out ready for them to see. So when that came to a head, so I'd done that, so anybody else that had come to them, because he always said to me, we have loads of these cases, revenge porn, this, that, anything using the internet, people struggle. And I was like, well, I've done nothing. I've not shared any dodgy pictures, any videos. I've not been on any dating apps. I've not given any money. What have I, all these things that people associate with being stupid online. I've been extremely vigilant, and I think my perpetrator knew how vigilant I was online. I come originally from the banking sector. So when that civil case was finally over, I just wanted my case to be there as a precedent for other people. And I wanted there to be a public apology, for there to be something on record that vindicated me because of all the people that had doubted me in the time before. So having gone through a legal system and a piece of paper at the end, that was enough for me. I didn't know my witness statement was going to be leaked. And that's how the podcast happened. So the first episode of the podcast you hear, my source handed me a document. That source wasn't me, so it definitely wasn't me. Because I'm quite a private person, really, despite doing lots of work in media and working in radio and in the arts. It's about supporting other people. That's what my role is. Championing other people. That's what I'm about, not myself. So I've always been quite private. For the podcast to happen, it was going to happen without me. I chose to make sure it was told properly. If somebody's going to do this now, I chose to work with Tortoise. And I thought that there's millions of podcasts out there. Who's going to listen to this one? And because I didn't particularly know who Tortoise was. Even though I'd researched them, no one really had heard of Tortoise too much. It was a new company. But the first episode went out and it went absolutely wild. And we had a podcast episode coming out once a week. And he'd given it away in the first episode. So you think that it's not going to, that kind of jeopardy and all that emotive feeling that you had wasn't going to work, because you already knew who it was right at the beginning, but it didn't seem to be the case. And it struck a chord with so many people. As a result of that podcast, even after the first episode, I was inundated with offers of documentaries and films and series and Bollywood and Hollywood. And it was absolutely crazy for someone who's as private as me. And I eventually agreed reluctantly with Netflix to do the documentary. And I did say to them it should happen after the police case, which was reopened after the podcast, that it should happen after that. And they didn't wait for it. So the police case is still open now, and the documentary's come out, and that's how it all happened. So along the way, despite coming from the media world, the production teams for both parties have had their total independence. Alexi, who did the podcast, he did work with me quite in depth. The only thing I did was tone check and fact check with the podcast, but with the documentary, I didn't have much. I was interviewed for 40 hours, and then you see the rest, which I have nothing to really do with. So, yeah.
Wow. I mean, as if you hadn't been through enough, having to relive it again through the podcast and then the Netflix documentary. And a lot of that is, well, the main reason for those two things is because it was leaked. So it's not even like you were like, hey, can I have a podcast? Can I share my story? And, you mentioned time and time again how private you are, how private you've been, and you are a private person. So it's, for me, what strikes a chord is the fact that A, you went through this, but B, you're reliving it of no choice of your own. And that must be so difficult. And many people, I'm sure many people in this audience would find that difficult to speak out after. So it's a catfish, which never used to be a thing, but now we know what catfishing means. But the key thing here in this story, in what happened to you, is the betrayal of a family member, not just a stranger on the internet, someone who was quite close to you, which is just heartbreaking when it's within itself. But going through what you went through and having to do the 40 hours of recording and be part of the podcast, where did you find that strength from to share your story?
I think initially it was, like I said, with the podcast, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere, but I was so determined to, I've always had a voice. Yeah. Despite not being somebody who wants to be famous. That's not what I want to be. I do love doing my radio. I do love hosting things. I am out there doing things. I am very visible in my community. I do a lot of work in the public domain. So despite that, I'm being private. It was difficult, but like I said, I didn't think it was going to get heard as much as it did. But for me, I think for anybody who worked with me ever, always knew that I'm actually quite tough. And I've got this very soft and very funny, I joke about, and people don't take me seriously and all of that kind of thing. But anyone who's worked with me knows I'm absolutely quite the opposite. I will crack that whip. You will be rewarded if you do well. But yeah, I do crack the whip, and I am really determined. But the other thing is I'm really principled. Being fair is fair. If this person has done something wrong, they need to be held to account. One of the things was that I felt like that person has now had 9 years worth of private information of mine, being family photos. I don't know who else she's been talking to other than the people she was talking to, my mum, my brother, my aunt, my cousin, my friends. So all these other people were being catfished as well, who were in my circle. I'd been talking to several people who were all one person, but she's obviously been stalking other people to get information. So we think she's catfished other people to get very private information about other people. She's clearly, there's been a lot of stalking going on. What I didn't want, because this is a family member and not a stranger, I was finding that every time I tried to open my mouth to say something, the threat of having somebody who is in a well-to-do city job, who's 13 years younger than me, has the upper hand, is holding this information as a form of blackmail against me, to not say anything. Because remember, she's now put me in a position where I've lost everything. I have ended up using my savings. I was a size 0 skeleton. I looked absolutely awful. I'd been made redundant and I wasn't allowed to get another job while I was in that process, going through that. So there's all these questions about me. People going, "Oh my God, you're a workaholic. Like, where have you been for the last couple of years? Where's?" So you could pit me, an older woman, against a 13-year younger woman who's extremely successful, has a whole life ahead of her. And there's me complaining about her. I look like a loser deliberately while she's got everything. So I needed to have my voice back, and that's why my principle was like, she needs to be held to account.
Yeah.
She needs to be accountable for actions. I don't care how it happens. It's not about revenge, but this shouldn't be allowed to happen. And we all know of all these stories all the time, where we hear them from, we hear about them from media all the time. We hear them online. And I'm talking about 2018 now, when I went to my lawyer and he was telling me all these stories of other people. And it's absolutely shocking what people go through. And I said, well, I haven't done anything wrong.
No.
You can challenge me to say, where was I weak? Where did I not do this? Where did I not do that? So use my case. I was like, literally, use my case. I don't care. I can say that. So that was where my strength came from. I was like, if this can help people, so be it.
Yeah. And spending the short amount of time I have with you today, I can see that you radiate strength and courage and confidence. And honestly, it's an honor to be on this stage with you today, because what you're doing is giving other voices a platform, because we cannot have this happen again. I want to go back to the documentary where you speak about the nature of the relationship being quite controlling towards the end, where there were instances of you going out with your friends and he didn't like that. And then when you found out the truth, that must have really impacted your level of trust in everyone. It could be anyone, but how did you rebuild your sense of trust and self-worth?
I think when the confession happened, it was like a double-edged sword. One, you're in total shock of what you've just learned. But the other bit was, if you've been in a coercive and controlling situation for such a long period of time where you're not allowed to even go to the bathroom without asking consent first, or you're not allowed to sleep without consent, or leave the house without consent, well, forget leave the house, leave my bedroom without consent. When you're in that position, it was also like this heavy weight lifting off me, and I felt like I was also, the first 3 months after, I was like rejoicing in the freedom. So it was like lots of people would, obviously I was in shock with what happened, but also that other side was, I can't wait to get on with the rest of my life now. And I think that optimism that I had, because I'm generally an optimistic person, the optimism that I had obviously at one point at kind of December time, so the confession was June. I think December 2018 was when I realised I am deluding myself. I'm deluded. If I think the rest of my life's going to be okay with just positivity, I need something to happen.
Yeah.
Because sometimes positivity isn't enough. You do need to just really deal with the situation.
Yeah. And by taking action, I suppose that's what gives you strength, doing what you're doing now, and it, like you said earlier, you didn't want to go out there and shout about the story, but by doing that, I suppose, is that giving you a source of strength as well?
I think when the podcast came out, I was blown away at the positivity after the podcast. It was made in a way which really had somebody else walking through my shoes, sifting through all the conversations and hearing the awful voice. I don't know how he did it, but I was driven to places and they relived what I lived in those situations. I think in the podcast you hear the drive to Brighton and we're just walking up to driving up to the house, and I wouldn't look at which house it was, but I'm having the beginning of a panic attack in the car. And they were like, there's all these things about, oh my God, you made her cry in the podcast. And they had a lot of backlash from things like that you triggered her. But I had been very straight. No one's going to understand unless they hear it. No one's going to understand how awful it was unless you hear me be put in that situation. But as a result of how that podcast was made, it helped a lot of people. And the messages and the messages that I've had and that Tortoise have had, Lexi particularly, that's had from all sorts of victims from all over the world. We talk about catfishing and romance fraud and all that kind of nonsense, but for people that have had other members of the family, their best friends do it to them, people in coercive and controlling situations. We talk about minority communities where honour becomes an issue. So I think my story touched on all these things, and it only came to light how much after the podcast.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have to say, well, actually, can we have a show of hands of who has heard the podcast series? Okay, so a few of you. The lights are blinding.
Yeah.
And then the Netflix documentary. See, that says it all.
That says it, yeah.
I urge you all to listen to this podcast series, because the level of detail that is missing in the series, in the show, it doesn't do the podcast any justice. And there are so many missing gaps. As Kirat mentioned earlier, Netflix is sensational. It's there for the viewings. It's entertainment. But Kirat's journey is so important and we all need to learn from it. So please do, when you go home or when you have time over the weekend, I urge you to listen to the podcast. It is something else. Okay, so I'd like to move away from the series, and for anyone else going through something similar, or God forbid you do in the future, what can people do going forwards?
Okay, so I have, in terms of going forwards, I'm going to go with sort of now. If anyone's going through anything like this now, and I've had this with both post the podcast and post the documentary, lots of people have realised that they're in a situation that they shouldn't be in and immediately contacted me. And first things first, they need to be able to tell the most important thing is having a safe space to speak. So they need to be able to tell somebody close to them they can trust and go with them to the police station. I wouldn't advise going by yourself because you're not going to be believed. Let's be straight. And that's straight advice. I would also say go to your doctor, get counselling, a psychotherapist, whatever you need to do immediately. Get all the help that you need to get in place. When you get to the police station, you need to make sure you get a crime reference number. And catfishing isn't a law. There isn't a law against catfishing. What there are laws against are fraud, malicious communications, obviously you need sexual acts, anything like that. There's, in my situation, there's things like impersonating a doctor. There was speaking to children, underage people. Anything that's done under a veil of deception. So anything that's a law, in like normal law, but if it's done under a veil of deception, that is the law that could be used in your particular circumstance. So if you have shared nudes, and that will be under, the Sexual Offences Act, or if they have been particularly nasty to you, if it is coercive and controlling behaviour, all those things, whatever has been done in an online deception that could be in the real world, those laws at the moment are what would apply to your particular cases. And you need to dig your heels in with the police, and you need to be absolutely firm. And unfortunately, you have to do your homework before you go. So you need to understand your story. You need to collect your evidence. One of the first things you need to do is, and this is advice I just say to you to share to people in your circles when they're going through anything, is you need to download all your evidence immediately before the perpetrator takes it down. The police have 1 month in which to redact sort of deleted profiles from any social media. We know that data exists out there. We know Meta has that data. We know X has that data. We know those companies have that data for a much longer period. But for us normal people, they can only access it for a month. So that's the first thing they need to make sure they do. And that's really, really important when it comes to evidence, because unless they can get that evidence directly from Meta, they're not going to get it from anywhere else. So all those things are the first steps to take. I have set up a page which is being updated at the moment, but the basic details are still on there of lots of different organisations that help me and I've been talking to since, and I've met some great organisations here today as well, who I hope to be working with in the future as well to help other people. But those are the most important steps to be taking if anything happens online.
Thank you for that. That's great. That was really insightful and very important information there. So just coming back to the documentary and the podcast slightly, earlier when we caught up, we were talking about the response, and we were saying, well, you were telling me how the response was really supportive and really positive, but there were a few people that were negative. Now, we don't want to focus on the negatives today. We're going to focus on the positives. But for everyone's awareness, why do you think some people result in victim shaming as opposed to focusing on the perpetrator?
Well, let's go back to the podcast. The whole thing about me doing all of this, the whole civil case, actually, let's go back to that, was because if I didn't speak about it, if I couldn't speak about it to my friends and family and not be believed, that's victim shaming. To be told to stay quiet because they're ashamed or they're embarrassed, that's victim shaming. If you're not getting the support that you need from the people around you, they're victim shaming you, right? So that's why I had to do my civil case. That's why I did my civil case, to help me not be victim shamed anymore, because my piece of paper I had for doing everything that I did would then point people to the perpetrator. Why did the perpetrator do what they did? After the podcast, I expected some nastiness. You have to be thick-skinned. But actually, it was absolutely manageable. It was so positive. And any negativity, I was actually absolutely able to have conversations with most people and turn them around. We had so many discussions and open conversations about these things, which opened people's eyes, because there's examples after, this happened to me over a period of 9 years. I have daily examples because what I was going through was daily. Wow. There's a million examples that I could share. With the documentary, my concern with the documentary has always been that it's too short. I didn't know it was going to be that short. That kind of stuff isn't discussed with me. I didn't know it was going to be that short. I didn't know anything of how it was going to look until I saw it. But I had always said it shouldn't be a female story, because one of the first things that I learned after 2018, when the confession happened, was 3 of my male friends in my own circle had had it happen to them to quite a serious extent. One had tried to go to the police. Another had just been silenced. He'd never spoken about it. I was with him just a few days ago. He's one of my best mates. And he never said anything to any of us. And another one, another good friend, his best friend flew to Canada to meet a woman who didn't exist.
Oh my God, wow.
Yeah, so it happens, right? But because people are silenced or they're ashamed, no one says anything, no one does anything. And in one recent survey, 60% of people had said they'd been catfished. Of that 40% of people said they'd been catfished on you, and then another 40% had said they knew of people that had been catfished and it'd been quite detrimental. Of that 40%, 60% of those victims were men.
Wow, I find that really shocking.
Yeah, it is really, well, it is and it isn't.
Yeah.
The other thing is I spent some time with a university professor talking about this, and she explained how men trying to get women online, and when a woman asks a man for intimate pictures, it's a huge ego boost. And then they realize on the other end, it actually wasn't a woman. So it's far more common than you think it is. But men, as we know, when we talk about men and mental health, men aren't so good at talking about these things. Whereas women might. Women get shamed. And I don't understand why men and women, and we're here at an IWD conference today, why men and women don't have the same voice. We're not allowed to have the same voice, or we're treated differently when we speak up. So women, we're like, oh, that's just another stupid woman that's done that.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter what your age or background is, whether you're a woman, that says it all. If you're a woman, you're going to get victim shamed compared to a man. It could be the same situation, it could be the same circumstances, but as women, we just tend to get victim shamed more than men do. So how do we combat that? What can we do to stop that?
Well, I think it's not a case of women. I think it's a case for women and men. But I think when men do speak up, depending on who they are, they get treated differently. But again, seeing the victim shaming of people, like a guy telling another guy what happened to them, he's like, oh, mate, how could you be? It's pub talk, stupid, like that whole thing. It's really, really difficult for men to speak up. But when women do speak up, we're just ridiculed because we're desperate for love. And apparently we're all desperate for love. And if anyone... my friends and my family who know me know how against the grain I am about not getting married the normal way in the South Asian thing and just doing things my way. So I am probably the last person. I want to get married, but I want to get married how I want to do it, not how anybody else wants to. But that whole women must be desperate all the time. And I think the documentary used sort of the biological clock. Obviously, that's something that plays in your mind as a woman. But that's not the be-all and end-all of our lives. As women, we have a lot more to offer than marriage and kids. If a woman wants that for herself, that's her choice. But that's not our be-all and end-all. So that's why I think we are treated differently, because that's what immediately comes to people's minds. And I'm disappointed that the documentary focused on that, because I've always said that this is an issue for both men and women. We need to allow men to speak up, and when women do speak up, they need to be heard. Is it a case of, if more men spoke up about what happened to them, would this situation, this catfishing scenario, this whole thing, would that be then taken more seriously if it happened to more men and more men spoke up. Well, it's happening to men, but if more men spoke up. So those are questions that we have in sort of discussions that are taking place at the moment.
And how do we support those victims to get them to speak up?
We need to create safe spaces for them to speak. At the police station should be a safe space to speak. I think you hear in the podcast, but I don't talk about it too often, but you hear in the podcast when I went to the police station, eventually having heard by a female police officer who was like, okay, you need to come in tomorrow again and we need to take your whole witness statement, which was obviously going to be very long. And, she gave me options to stay till the middle of the night, till like 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning and finish it, or come in the morning. So I went in the morning and she said, the officer behind the desk in the morning will take everything. I'll check it at 5 o'clock. So one, it took a female police officer to listen, but going in the next day and showing that person the reference that it was a CAD reference and I did all of it. The male police officer at the desk shouted at me and humiliated me in front of a police reception full of people, and I had to ask to go into a cubicle to speak. So, these kinds of things, like if you can't do that, if you can't go to a police station, it's not about just having a safe space to speak. It's speak and be believed, and then be taken seriously. So what I have done on the website, so people can email me and I will happily, I can't take on people's case. I'm not a caseworker or anything like that, and I don't claim to be. I will always help people with the first steps they need to take, and I will signpost you to the right people to speak to. And we're working on a campaign, hopefully, about de-weaponizing the internet, because catfishing is not the only thing. It's like online entrapment. People who know you, that do this to you, are your worst enemies, and that could come from a disgruntled ex, family politics, a disgruntled colleague, anyone. I said this to you earlier, this is a great event, but if I was unhappy with you and if I was a nasty person, I could easily start spreading nasty things about you online.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping me from poisoning you, your event, maybe reaching out to some of the vendors here and planting some worms of, doubt, seeds of doubt.
Please don't do that.
No, I'm not going to do it. But the point is, it's so easy, isn't it? We all know how easy it is.
Yeah.
And how do we stop that from happening? And this is where victim shaming comes from.
Yeah.
The internet's just becoming such an easy place for people to vent. And I've realised that out of all the nastiness that's been online, most people have only just watched the documentary. In that same time, they could have just Googled me and found out a lot more.
Yeah.
And from all the private messages and emails that I've had, and I think I was saying this to you, it's been thousands. I've had 8 nasty ones, which speaks volumes, because as a marketer, I know the potential of having so many more nasty messages come through to me. And one of them, because I was in a bad mood, I challenged and turned him around anyway. But it shouldn't be the case.
No, it really shouldn't. And when what happened to you, it was a time when Facebook wasn't even on phones. It was on laptops. You had to log in. You could only chat on a laptop. And it was almost a different age, if that's the right word.
Early. Everything's progressing so quickly with AI now. But at that time, I didn't even have a laptop. I had a desktop at home. So I actually had to come home, sit on my desk, switch the computer on. Eventually I had, but even then, even when I had a laptop, it was still online. I remember specifically when I was in Brighton, when I bumped into Bobby by chance, not even knowing that he lived there. I couldn't show him on my phone that I'd been talking to him, because you couldn't, because the only way I could have done that was go in and log on a desktop and say, hey, I saw you. But it was such a minor thing for me that it wasn't worth the energy.
Yeah. And I think that's what people fail to realise, because they don't mention that in the documentary, that it was on the laptop, not a phone that you can just pull out your pocket and show. And they left out a lot of key information, which I find very sad.
That's okay. You can't put 9 years into an 82-minute documentary. And if people don't realise that, then that says a lot about them as well. It's very quick. I think we're in a world, in a society that wants everything spoon-fed to them. And you know, that's what it's all about, and how we as a society conduct ourselves, what we're allowing online, what we're okay with online. How many times do we use the report button online when you see something nasty about anybody? And I'm probably one of the few people that every time I see a nasty thing, I'll just report it. I know Facebook or Meta are going to do pretty much nothing about it, but if all of us were constantly reporting stuff, it would make their life absolute hell.
Yeah.
And how else do we do it, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
And make the reporting button visible on every comment as well, or don't have comments on everything again.
My next question was around the next steps we can take around digital deception, but you've just answered that so eloquently, so thank you for that. What do you think needs to change in society to help women feel safer, more confident in online spaces? What can we do?
Again, you know, when we say women, I find this really, really difficult because my perpetrator was a woman. And it's such a... I find it really tough because this is what shows me that, you know, women, like I support good people. Whether you're male or female, I'll champion all good people. I do recognize the differences and the disparities that exist when it's a male, when it's a female. And at every point along the way, I've had to have a male standing next to me to be believed. That's something that's not okay. It's these kinds of things that aren't okay. These whole stereotypes we have of women being a certain way or vulnerable, or we're not vulnerable. We are vulnerable physically, but mentally we're probably far stronger in so many ways. We talk about stuff. We're willing to be shamed as long as we're heard, because we're so desperate to be in that equal place. And that takes strength to do. To share a vulnerability takes strength. And so, you know, you are strong. And I also talk about women who have been through DV, and I, like being a high achiever while this was happening to me, you know, you always wonder how much more. I mean, I've worked with lots of groups of women who've been through some kind of DV. Those women are generally amazing, and you wonder how much more they could achieve if their wings hadn't been clipped, if they were just given those opportunities, and how you're perceived after. And it's like, oh, if you don't speak about it, you're not going to be treated differently. As soon as you speak about it, you're treated differently. And that's the problem. You're treated like you're weak. You're treated like a victim. You're treated like you can't do things for yourself. Yet you've been probably functioning on so many different levels, on high alert. You're multitasking in so many ways. You're hiding things, covering things up, not letting this be seen, not letting that be heard. You're performing. You're still doing everything you need to do with your friends and family, not letting anyone know. Can you imagine how much more you could do if actually you weren't having to fight that battle of that layer of abuse in between? So we're actually not weak. We're actually far stronger than people think we are, because we've dealt with that. We've managed that. And I defy a lot of people to deal with that and come out the other side. So I think these perceptions that we have of people, like, I'm going to point out that a lot of the time people meet me and they expect me to be a wreck. It doesn't mean I don't cry. It doesn't mean I don't have bad days. I choose publicly to have a confident face on. I choose publicly to laugh, to be myself. Somebody called me, oh yeah, what do you think is going to happen to you because you're a party animal? Well, I work hard, I play hard. Of course I'm allowed to enjoy I've been through hell. Can I not laugh? Can I not smile? So I get a lot of that thrown back at me, because people think I have to look a certain way, I have to behave a certain way after everything happened to me. And I think this is that perception I think we have to break down of what victims are. We're entitled to life, we're entitled to laugh, enjoy ourselves, and not be forced to relive what we lived in order to satisfy people that we actually went through that. You know, it's that case of how much evidence do you want from a victim to be believed? yet the perpetrator's not been asked. Like, all the focus on this is on me.
Yeah.
Have you noticed?
Yeah, I've noticed that.
Where's the perpetrator in all this? Why is anybody actually not asking? That we all agree what that person did was wrong.
Yeah. But why is she not being invited to
it goes
share her
back to that
account?
whole victim shaming thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's that whole thing. And I just think the perception of victims, the perception of people who, in that whole victim thing, of whether you think we're stupid, whether you think we're weak, or we should, if we're strong, that we don't need help. Like, right now, I think I was talking to you earlier, post the documentary, my PTSD has been awful. And I didn't have that after the podcast. I've had it after the documentary. And so it's been worse, the worst it's been since 2018 and 2019. I'm sleeping at the moment probably 3 or 4 hours a night. Little things that happen which cause you to like physically react where you can't control it. And people using words like trigger just like a throwaway word. Yeah. You know, it's quite offensive to someone. I'm like, that's not a trigger, that's just a bad memory. Don't confuse the two. Things like that. I think despite going through all these things and having these things, the fact that we're still able to function normally and do everything and want to laugh and want to smile, you know, we shouldn't be pushed into corners. We're far stronger and far more resilient than people think we are. And I think that just that victim shaming thing alone, if we as a society could stop that somehow,
Yeah.
whether it's via the internet and just generally with the way we see things, just change that perception round, would help in so many ways.
Kirat, I can't take my eyes off you when you speak because you are so powerful. You're just, the way you speak is so eloquent and you speak with so much power and tenacity. And I wish we could be here all day and just go on because you have so much more to share. I'm going to wrap it up with one final question.
Mm-hmm.
As we celebrate International Women's Day, how do you think your journey of reclaiming your voice and standing up for yourself can inspire others, especially women, to embrace their own power?
Oh my God, like I just said, so many women have so many powers, and women and men, but women, like, we really need to own ourselves. Yeah. I've always been somebody who, as a kid growing up, I think my dad loves it, but he also hates it too. My mum's quite the opposite to me. She's very submissive and sort of very much that kind of whole South Asian submissive, subservient person. And I've had to work at making her strong, which I've done. But then she does get scared quite quickly. But, you know, you hear her in the documentary and she's quite powerful. That's because she's speaking with passion finally. You know, I've had to teach her how to be assertive at work and all sorts of things. So I've always been that person in my family that I've challenged people. And don't be scared to challenge, but you don't have to. I always have to say, do it with love. Do it with dignity, do it with respect. There's no need to humiliate anybody. You don't have to be nasty about it. And I think that's for me, that's the most important thing. We can talk about these things, but you don't need to put people down. We don't need to humiliate anybody. Obviously, there's a point where, you know, if you're being attacked and being, you know, that's a different scenario. But when you're having discussions, try to do them respectfully, have them with dignity. Don't accuse people. If you're generalizing when you're making a point, be clear it's a generalization. We seem to be we're not as thick-skinned as we think we are. I'm thick-skinned, but not everybody is. So, have empathy and always try to put yourself in other people's shoes. And that's how I've grown up. And if that makes me weak in people's eyes, that's their view. You're allowed your opinion. But I also think that's what makes me strong. That's what allows me to think, if I was in that person's shoes, what would I have done? And I always challenge people in my story, if you were in my shoes and you had somebody having a heart attack on the other end of the phone, what would you do? Would you just put it down? You know, it's those kinds of things. And so I think women, don't be scared to speak, just do it. Fantastic. That way, yeah.
And earlier you mentioned a website. So where can we hear more information about what you're doing?
Okay, so it's being updated, but the current information is still up there. It's just www.kiratassi.co.uk. You can drop me an email there if you need help with anything, and I'm happy to point you in any direction. Or if you need, if you're stuck in a situation and scared, which is, it's horrible how many messages I get, but there is help. If there's no other safe space for you, that is a safe space.
Amazing. Kirat, I can't thank you enough for joining us here today to celebrate and share your journey. You are such a powerful woman. You're breaking down those boundaries and those barriers, and you're giving so many women a platform without even knowing. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart, from everyone here today. We appreciate you. We love you for what you've spoken about and for what you're doing. Please, can we give Kirat a large round of applause, please?
Thank you to you for having me, and thank you all of you as well. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.